Thank you for everyone who's joining us. We'll get started in just another minute here. I see we have 62 people so far. That's great. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just another minute. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started while a few more people join us. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is an important series about the challenges our city is facing. My name is Ann Peterson. I'm the Executive Director of the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation. The Trust is perhaps most well known as the operators of El Presidio de Santa Barbara State Historic Park, but we have long been active in larger conversations about the planning and future of our city, including the redevelopment of Plaza de la Guerra, the development of a historic resources ordinance, and conversations like this one about the type of city that we want Santa Barbara to be in the future. Historic preservation organizations are often associated with the desire to prevent all change, and historically, that's for good reason. The field has evolved, however, and we acknowledge that change in our communities is inevitable and maybe sometimes for the best. Historic preservation plays a vital role in managing change by ensuring that those threads of continuity that help us ground us as a community continue. The preservation community is an important stakeholder in the future of our city, and hosting this series is our way of holding space for this conversation. Some housekeeping details. Our presentation this evening will be closed captioned with subtitles for audience members who are hearing impaired. You can find the control to turn on or turn off the subtitles in the bottom right-hand corner of your Zoom screen. It has you can see a CC icon and you can click on that. Or if you don't see the CC icon, look for the more icon, which is the 3 dots. And you can see the option to start a live transcription there. This presentation will also be recorded and be made available at a later date on the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation website and also our YouTube channel. We wanted to begin tonight with a quick poll to find out who's joining us. And our technical wizard, Kevin McGarry, who's hanging out in the background making this all go smoothly, is going to launch this poll. So here it is. We'll give you about a minute to answer. It's an easy question. What brought you here tonight? And then we'll share the results. Thanks for filling out the poll. Give you a few more seconds here, and then we'll close out the poll and share our results. All right, everybody, we're going to close the poll. Let's see who's joining us here tonight. All right, looks like 43% are interested citizens who've been following this conversation and care about their city's future. That's great, welcome. And we also have a robust turnout of 34% from professionals in architecture, planning, or preservation. 18% are trust members. Thank you. We welcome all of you here. Thanks so much. And a 5% who say this whole topic is new to me and they're curious to learn more. So we're glad to have you here as well. And we hope you'll continue on this journey with us. And no one answered, how did I get here? Which I guess is good news. So you've all intended to be here and showed up with purpose. So thank you for that. And we'll close out the poll here. This series is going to address the current challenges that we face, including the need to develop more housing, revitalize our downtown core, and plan for places that locals and visitors can enjoy. I'm sharing this slide with you so that you can see the details of the other programs in the series. And please note that we'll be dropping a URL into the chat where you can find more information on our website and register for any of these other programs. So we hope to see you as we move forward. We're also grateful to the sponsors for this series: Appleton Partners, Ashley and Vance Engineering, Giffen and Crane General Contractors, Harrison Design, Village Properties Realtors, and the Cornell Collective. Thank you so much for your support of the series. Anthony Grumbine will introduce the series tonight with his presentation by addressing questions and concerns that the city administration and our community stakeholders are grappling with as we work to share a plan for the future. The presentation will be followed by a panel discussion featuring Santa Barbara's Senior Assistant to the City Administrator, Nina Johnson, and City of Santa Barbara Architectural Historian, Nicole Hernandez, as well as a short opportunity for audience Q&A. And with that, I would like to tell you a little bit more about our featured speaker. And I'll introduce our panelists after the presentation. Anthony Grumbine is a principal architect at Harrison Design and specializes in the architecture of Santa Barbara. He is the current chair of the City of Santa Barbara's Historic Landmarks Commission and is the current president of the board of the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation. And with that, thank you, Anthony. I'm going to turn this over to you.
Great, thanks, Anne. I tried to vote on the poll, and I tried actually to click on the "How did I get here?" but it wouldn't let me vote. So but I was going to be the one person that wasn't sure how they got there. So thank you everyone for coming, for joining us here. I'm going to start off by just sharing my screen to kind of kick this off. Let's see, and sorry, excuse my poor technical skills. The classical architect we don't have to be good at technology. All right, let's see. Let's show here from the beginning. Okay. All right. So let's kick this off. And really the goal of this presentation is to, or this first kickoff is to really sort of set the stage for a number of the questions that I think we're hoping to start to find some principled answers to that work very well with Santa Barbara. So there's a number of challenges going on right now, all related in different ways. But this series is meant to be a continuation of that dialogue and discussion, and sort of getting down to some of the roots that might help inform us as we move forward as a community. So there was a for those of you who don't know of it, there was a really fantastic, and I'm going to just jump forward actually, one Plaza de la Guerra symposium over 20 years ago that's now available. And I think Kevin might be able to put in the chat box the link there for those of you who would be interested. I highly, highly recommend it. It's even though it was over 20 years ago, it's very interesting to see them wrestling with a lot of the same issues that we're wrestling with now, and some really great insights by some fantastic experts. One of which was Carol William Westphal, and he had this quote, and it then eventually got turned into a book. Here, I'll hold it up for you to see here, Plaza de la Guerra Reconsidered, and that was a summary of some of these talks and a lot of the images. But in it, he has this great sort of paraphrase summary of a way to look at it now. So he says, "We have fallen out of the habit of building cities. Instead, we build shopping centers and suburbs. But worse than that, even when we build cities, we build commercial areas as if they are shopping centers, and residences as if they are suburban houses. The number of places that have resisted this trend is tiny. One thinks of Charleston, of Savannah, and of Santa Barbara, places very different from one another, but which nonetheless share two important qualities. Each of them is cherished by its residents and visitors alike, and each of them has a clear visual character that is very urban, very rich, and very distinct." And so I thought that was kind of a great way of kind of setting the stage, and as well also as a pitch for those of you who are interested to watch the series. It's not that long. I think it's like 4 hours long or so, all the different talks. And anyway, so we can talk about that later as well if people are interested. Okay, so with that, let's set the stage and talk about Santa Barbara, and let's sort of do a quick skim through the history of the urban development, especially the city development of Santa Barbara, and where our forms come from, and sort of just a sort of cursory quick look. So, of course, starting with the Presidio in terms of the architecture that has lasted. Obviously, the Chumash Indians were here, and which is part of the reason, the main part of the reason why the Presidio and the mission were founded here. And so it was amidst a thriving Chumash settlement that the Presidio was built, and actually by Chumash hands, and the mission as well. So there's these two cultures that begin out together, and with the Presidio, the first question is, why is it built in a square? And we kind of take the square for granted in a lot of ways. But the square, the reason why this Presidio was built in the square was because of the law of the Indies. And the law of the Indies, which was established the rules for setting out new cities or new places, new foundings in the New World from Spain's perspective, dictated that one of the first things to do was to figure out the siting of the city in the main plaza by looking at northwest or northeast southwest and the prevailing winds, and then turning your block or turning your plaza on 45 degrees so that you kind of block the winds so they don't rush down the city streets. That will eventually be built. And the idea is you're basically sort of planting a seed that then grows up into a settlement. And so these were based on the law of the Indies. In that presentation as well, mentioned earlier, the Plaza de la Guerra Reconsidered, one of the historians goes through a lot of these founding principles, and her quotes, one of the good quotes that summarizes the truly impressive scale of the Spanish accomplishments in California, so far away in miles and in time from Philip's original lawmaking, King Philip, may be seen in the persistence of the Spanish patterns at Santa Barbara. And this goes for both the urban pattern and as well as the pattern of architecture, clay tile roofs, plaster walls, and that. So this is sort of a good summary of sort of our architectural roots starting way back in Spanish time. And you see this obviously in spades with Casa de la Guerra and Plaza de la Guerra, and see it from this era that our Spanish roots come. All right, so now we're going to test out Kevin's poll finding, the next poll. And so this is finding Santa Barbara. So with a poll, we thought it'd be fun to pick out, see who can recognize which building is in Santa Barbara. So our choices are A, B, C, or D, not being none. So I don't know if Kevin, if we can kick up the poll for people. So if you want to answer which of these 4 choices you think is correct, I'll give you a minute. It seems like there should be some sort of Jeopardy theme song going right now, but you don't want me even humming music, so. How are we doing, Kevin?
We're good. I think the poll might be blocking the images, so we maybe did it a little quick.
Oh, I see. Should I move it?
No, I don't know if you can move the poll, but we'll just we'll do the results we have now, and then we can you can talk about it.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. All right, so we've got A being 32%, but B wins with 39%, A with 32%, and C with 19%, and D with 10%. All right, this is fun. This is the first time I've done polls with Zoom. It's pretty neat to see, be able to see people's reactions. All right, so we will go to the answers, and the answer is A. So the 32% that got it right in terms of this being Santa Barbara. So which obviously, this is a bit of a trick question. It was a bit cheating, but and the most obvious visually apparent being a mission revival and Spanish colonial revival. But this was, the Zweibel Apartments in West Hollywood, and this is the Castaneda Hotel in Las Vegas. So, but very much this is what we associate Santa Barbara with. So the next obvious question is, how in the world did we get to here on State Street from what we were just looking at with Casa de la Guerra? So the answer to that is the next phase of Santa Barbara's building, which is the grid. So the Haley grid was Santa Barbara being part of California and California becoming a state and in 1849, 50. Now all of a sudden it becomes as part of the state, it gets a grid and everything gets laid out, and it moves towards a typical American Western town is really where it's going. And you can see in the middle of this grid, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but you can have, there's Casa de la Guerra right here and Plaza de la Guerra right here and the Presidio over here. And then slowly the grid will basically overtake and go through all of the original Spanish settlement, and which is why things are sort of cut up and a little bit off skewed. But what they were building was this. So this was, most people would look at this picture and very much say, this is, sort of a classical American late 1800s, early 1900s city and town, very tall, big Victorian-like buildings, but this is State Street. And then this is Santa Barbara 1890s and end of 1898, so almost 1900. And if you look at this map, now you have the grid that's been laid out all over Santa Barbara. You've got all these Victorian buildings showcased all the way around. This was the old courthouse up here, showcased all the way around. And then until you get down to finally the corner, there's one adobe here, and that's the Mission. So at this time, obviously the adobes were here, the Presidio, Casa de la Guerra, but they're not really showcasing that. They're really showcasing all the Victorian development that has happened throughout the city. Again, so here we have State Street, with the trolley car and very much not looking like anything that we imagine State Street to have been at this time. Now, of course, this all changed and in 1925 with the earthquake. And when we look back and forth at these pictures, you can see the sort of the tall, especially these sort of the tall parapet walls, balustrades in the top, and as well as the upper stories get damaged in the earthquake because things rack back and forth, and the upper parts of buildings get damaged. So this became an opportune time, or just was the sort of the perfect time of both catastrophe, but also a well-oiled plan in place, because they were actually trying to make Santa Barbara go Spanish colonial revival and Mediterranean revival. And so this became the perfect sort of catalyst for the changeover. You had a bunch of buildings that are damaged and need to be remade. One of the buildings that wasn't damaged, it's interesting, the background here is the Balboa building. The De La Guerra dead ends in State Street right here, or it ends in it now. And the Balboa building was a very recently finished Sewell, Murphy, and Hastings building, and here's the drawings of it. Very big, very tall, and these were actually the sequence of drawings leading up to it, and actually going a little more Spanish, or Mediterranean at least, revival, with some tile roof and a parapet, and then it actually survived just fine through the earthquake. And so you have where the city was going. That's why it was important. Now, this is a very tall, big building. I don't think that all the buildings were going to this, but at least that was the trajectory that things were going on. So they were going larger and they were going Mediterranean in their sequence. So this is just a little illustration of that. Here you've got a three-story building on the corner, and then it gets damaged, and I have the dashed lines here showing you where it was. Gets damaged. Sometimes it's the top floor, sometimes it's a parapet. Gets remodeled as a tile roof, and also redone in plaster. And you can get things done quickly and get a building permit if you went Spanish colonial revival, and if you didn't, well, you're out of luck. So policy helped shape the city, and we have the Santa Barbara that we see today. This is an interesting drawing to look at as what was happening right before the earthquake. This is 1923 by Hastings, of Sewell, Murphy, and Hastings. And this was a proposal for Chapala Street, and showing how you can put sidewalks under the buildings, have these long arcades of covered walk, and have these sort of fairly tall 3-story and 4-story buildings fronting each other and making this great outdoor street room by these having sort of fairly tall buildings, not giant, but fairly tall buildings and these covered walks. So this is an example of the urban move that was being proposed, but then never done. One of the other key things that is really super interesting in terms of it, I don't know of any other example in the country that has this, and potentially in Europe, but in the country that has this building or this urban form, which is super interesting in Santa Barbara. So we see it where we get it from. So we first had the Victorian grid blocks, right? And as you saw on some of those buildings, everything's street frontage. It's all about the face of the street. So you front the street, and little arrows show where you go in as a pedestrian or as the public. And then the back of house or the center of the block is really just functions as a loading and unloading or whatever, but it's really not the public realm, and it's not the realm that you go to. Now all of a sudden with Santa Barbara, there's been this transformation now. You had the Victorian grid on the outside, and you still have that, but now all of a sudden there begins to be paseos that go through the middle of the block, little courtyards, and these sort of, that is very charming and very, very, you can get lost in the middle of the block. And then as you work your way out, you're back onto the regular grid and you're in sort of normal ordered land again. And so there's this mix between this romantic inner block, and then you pop out and you're back on, okay, I'm at this street and this street. It's interesting because this is sort of the reverse of a lot of the European cities, which had these medieval sort of seemingly random and just following topography, every which way roads. And then later, Enlightenment and rational thought of either boulevards or major road cutting through and making these very intentional plazas or other things. And so this is sort of the reverse, rather than having this haphazard roads that get cut through with rational boulevards. Instead, this is a rational grid, which gets all these fun little romantic inserts into the middle of the block. So it's very unique and very, very specific to Santa Barbara, and almost nowhere else, or perhaps nowhere else. So that thinking was part of these are the drawings that are on the back of the David Gebhardt room, the Historic Landmarks Commission meets at and are famous of the 1920s and pre and post earthquake drawings that were proposals for Santa Barbara. And these were Allied Architects of Santa Barbara and also Allied Architects of Los Angeles. And there was a lot of there was funding and workings of people to help see the big vision and the development of Santa Barbara. That a lot of it didn't get built, but at least it helped the visioning process. And that's where they were going for. So these are great to see. And in them, you often will see the openings. And for example, right here, this lower one in the arch, this segmented arch here, you can see a little shadow, and it's implying that you're looking through into a courtyard, and as well here. So you're seeing that they're looking at inside the blocks is not just the Victorian street frontage, but actually going into the block and having these great discoveries. So this is an interesting map because it's interesting to compare to the Victorian map. The Victorian map where we had the grid, looking out over everything and emphasizing all these Victorian buildings, and now you sort of have the reverse. So you have, they're showing the grid because the grid is there, but they're showing all these little adobes and the mission and the courthouse and kind of blending all these Spanish, and even though by blending, you're spanning from El Cuartel here with the Presidio, 1782, showing this, very old Spanish building, one of the oldest in the state, and then to the courthouse, which is 1920s, late 20s, and it's kind of celebrating all of it all together. So it's all the different adobes and the different Spanish colonial revival architecture, and sort of all rolling it into one big fiesta, right? So here is our annual fiesta, Old Spanish Days. So it's an emphasizing of that part of the history. All right, so next is sort of an analysis of what it is to be a Santa Barbara block in 3 dimensions a little more. And so this is El Paseo, this is Casa de la Guerra here, this is a street in Spain on the backside, this is going into the block, and El Paseo was done, Bernard Hoffman, Pearl Chase was part of it as well, Bernard Hoffman, the Craigs, George Washington Smith, a bunch of other architects were all part of this revitalization or this Spanish colonial push in the early 1920s. And El Paseo was actually done to basically say, this is a prototype, and to do this, look how wonderful it is to have these paseos to the block and all this charm. And it really didn't work that well until the earthquake happened, because then there was a total makeover. La Arcada as well is a good example. Interestingly, it has all this flat roof that you never see because it has the little low sloped little bit of roof goes a long way if you're below it, because it looks like it keeps going up, but you can't even tell. But you have this really big block of building, and then you cut it through, and you have a little turtle fountain back here, something of interest and something you can see from the street. So it pulls you into the block, and then you go and you start to go out and discover these other areas, or you see these other things as you get into the block. Now there's the Library Plaza and all that development up here is happening, which is great, and it's going to be part of helping to really complete the inner workings of this block. So then, looking at the form of the building, one of the big challenges is we have the discussion of how big does it feel from the street, and to try to make it feel smaller, we do this wedding cake stack back, where you stack back into the block. And part of the problem with this is that isn't one, it's not actually a typical traditional urban character, but two, it also densifies the middle of the block in the middle of the building. So although it's useful at times, the more authentic Santa Barbara form is actually opening up large buildings and having courtyards inside and little paseos inside, and really building to the street frontage more. So this is just kind of a little illustration of that. Here is now we're kind of going from the building now out to the zoning, right? So one of the big issues with the built forms in urban environments is a zoning question. That's sort of the biggest driver on the big, mile high view looking down. How do things lay out? This was interesting to see because this is an old historic zoning map, and in it I highlighted the yellow where State Street is and where they were zoning for this. But they zoned as retail, business offices, and dwellings. So that's a really interesting. So that's basically mixed use, right? Which is what was moved away from the mixed use traditional, urban zoning, was moved away from to, especially post World War II, a very much a modern zoning of separation of uses and not having this mixed use character of the city. But it was interesting to see that even from a very early time, it was a traditional city in those ways. And then here it's interesting on this side to compare. This is a aerial 3D scan of the city, now then sort of turn back around in terms of depth, and so you can see the density at the core of State Street and the long spine and organization of this large dense buildings along this core. It highlights a couple things. For one, it highlights the long linearity of State Street, which is a very interesting and not so average organization. Usually traditional cities are organized around a core and they sort of spread out as you go. In this case, we have a long core, so we spread out and get less dense and smaller and more single-family bungalows, which are like little houses, little craftsman houses, or other things like that. As you spread out away from this, as you go from one side to the other here, get to these little tiny single-family houses, but it actually stretches a long way. So it's an interesting form, but there it is. Now, in contrast to that, we can now look at sort of what the post-World War II zoning is. And La Cumbre Plaza, I don't want to pick on it, but it's an easy one to pick on, especially now, because of the form of it. And so what is the form and shape that we see of La Cumbre Plaza? We see a giant sea of parking lot wrapping all the way around. And then we have this sort of core within that parking lot of building mass. And why do we have this form? Why don't we have a typical street frontage form? Well, because you now are shaping your city on the car. So the car takes you here. You have to have a place for it to park because you have all this parking, and then you go in to shop and you do all your shopping. You get back in your car, you go back out. So that's a form of city that creates this shape of giant voids of parking lot and then the shops in the middle. But what that does is it separated out the shopping from the rest of life as well. So there's no intermix, there's no mixed use. It's all single use, and you surround it with the way you get there, which is, in this case, the car. Interestingly enough, and then thankfully it didn't happen, this was one of the proposed ideas for, in the 1970s, 1974, for downtown. And here, let's find Casa de la Guerra. Here it is. Here's Plaza de la Guerra, and there was a redesign for Plaza de la Guerra idea as well. But so here you have the downtown core. Here's State Street, right? And what is being proposed? Well, they're looking like they're taking basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, almost 6 blocks. 6 blocks in the downtown core, starting off State Street, going all the way to Bath, and wiping it all out, and then surrounding it with a sea of parking. And then your core is your mall, right? So they got to do a mall surrounded by parking. So this is sort of the extreme example of an idea that was actually being proposed for downtown Santa Barbara that thankfully didn't happen. But this didn't happen on this scale, but it did happen on a subtler, smaller scale, which is the parking requirements for the downtown. And what ended up happening was a lot of lots didn't get built or got torn down or whatever and became parking lots sprinkled throughout the city. So now we don't have this as a giant sea of parking, but we have little parking lots throughout. And then, eventually as well, we built separate parking structures, which at least condensed things, which was good because it condensed the parking into, instead of a sea, it's, kind of sort of maybe half of a block or a block of parking. Okay, so now where is this all going? Well, now let's look at what I think might be a really great inspiration for sort of a path forward, which is, as on the Historic Landmarks Commission, having the answers the answers are right behind us in terms of where we're sitting, and have our backdrops to all these great drawings. And these great drawings are not what was actually built for the most part. A lot of them were never built and never built to this size or this density, but they were the inspiration to go forward with something like this. And so when we ask questions like, how can we fit housing? How can we have more downtown core and revitalized and have people there for shopping and people there for to have the commerce go up? And a lot of these answers, and how we have transportation that allows for not using car for everything or not being required to have a car. A lot of these answers are actually traditional architecture answers that were already being proposed, and we sort of already have a bit of a cheat sheet game plan for this. So what I did with this was turned these street front elevations, these historic drawings, into 3 dimensions, just supposing what the middle of it might look like if they were to play this all out in 3D. So you have the tower here, you run along, you have this big building here that's 50-some feet tall, and as a corner, and then but then you also open up the block, and you have these openings that go in. You have a plaza, and you have openings and paseos that go back out. So you have the same Santa Barbara form, but having a sort of that full expression of it, not just as an elevation, because sometimes we can think of elevations and they're not. They're just these flat flat things that we facades that we look at. But in reality, they're implying this depth. Here's a George Washington Smith example. You see the Libero Theater in the background here. So this is what he was proposing for this street frontage on State Street, with the Libero Theater in the background there. He was looking at 2 ways. He looked at it with an arcade, and he also looked at it with no arcade. And he just says that with and without an arcade, arcaded sidewalk. So they're looking at having that covered arcaded sidewalk similar to the Hastings drawing we saw before. This is it now. Obviously, here's Libero Theater. Obviously, there's the big parking lots and parking structures, which at least are stacked. So it's not just as a sea of parking. And then how everything else played out with it, but it played out as a big department store and not the sort of mixed use density that George Washington Smith was proposing. Okay, so then from there, we sort of did, and Nicole Hernandez and working with the city, we sort of did a dive into looking at sort of analyzing what some historic buildings and sort of the range of historic buildings that Santa Barbara already has that might be good for as potential inspirations for going forward and sort of figuring out some of our are issues and problems and where we might want to put things like this. So we analyze how big the building is. Interestingly, this is the Libero building, which right sort of next to the Libero Theater. And it's by Julia Morgan, who's one of the best architects of the 1900s. And looking at it, its form is very open. So it fits lots of bedrooms with an inn, so which also is a residential form in terms of being able to have light and air and living quarters. And so, but it's also very tall and very dense, and it has what's the FAR, floor to area ratio, which basically just means if you covered the whole lot with one layer, one floor, and then you cut it in quarters and stacked it up, that would still be the same. So it would be a 1-to-1, a 1.0 FAR. You can stack it up in 4 stories tall, or you can lay it all out over 1 story. But it basically is the equivalent of the volumes of the building that's on the site compared to the actual site itself. So FAR of 2.5 is pretty high and fits a lot within this area. All right, so here we go. This brings us to our next question, our next poll question. So it's the Margaret Baylor Inn is the official name of it. So Julia Morgan, I'll give a little quick spiel on her after we start this, start our questionnaire here. So the question is this too big for Santa Barbara, right? So is this too big of a building for Santa Barbara? And what do you think? And there's some options, so you don't have to just say yes or no. You can specify and get a little bit more specific about it. So we're saying here we go. So the A is yes, it's too big for Santa Barbara. B is it's only acceptable in the downtown core, so you're limiting it to only the core. C is it's fine anywhere in Santa Barbara, and D is too small, double it. So there's our D answer is there for those of you who want to double the Margaret Baylor Inn. So while you answer this question, I'll give you a little bit of background on Julia Morgan. Julia Morgan didn't do a lot of buildings in town. I believe she just did 2. This building and the gym behind it, which is tucked behind. Julia Morgan was most famous for doing Hearst Castle, which probably many of you have seen or at least some pictures of, up in San Simeon, only about I think 2 or 3 hours from here. But that was one of only, I think, 500 plus of her projects. She also did all kinds of YWCAs. She worked with Phoebe Hearst, they were huge philanthropists that built YWCAs throughout the country. Julia Morgan did a lot of those designs, but she did all kinds of designs for across the United States. She was also, interestingly, the first woman architect to make it into the École des Beaux-Arts, which was the absolute top architecture school, which actually of the world in France. They didn't allow her in. Oh, all right. Let's see. Okay, we got our poll results in. Okay, so we have 63% say only acceptable in downtown area core. 23% say yes, too big for Santa Barbara. And 13% say no, this size is fine anywhere. And then 1% say too small, double the size. All right, at least we got one person in there. Okay, so thanks for everyone for doing the poll. All right, so Julia Morgan, just to wrap it up, she tried twice and did not get in, even though she scored in the top, I think 10% or so of all the applicants. Oh, of those who actually got in, not of all the applicants, of those who actually got in, she still scored the top 10%. The last time, I think she scored 3rd, which was like the top, whatever, 3%, 5%. And then they finally had to let her in because she did so well. But she is totally amazing. So anyways, this is a great Julia Morgan building. All right, on to the next. Okay, so now we're coming down in size for those of you who thought it was too big or too big for the core. We have, that was about the biggest good big traditional building. There's still some bigger, actually. George Washington Smith did some bigger, and the Balboa building on State Street, the one I showed you before, was definitely bigger. It was bigger by 20 feet or so than the Margaret Baylor building or Margaret Baylor Inn. But So now we're coming down in scale. We have some examples in between as well, but this is a 2-story example, really down and with a courtyard housing, open to an internal courtyard. You can actually fit a lot of units in here, apartments or otherwise, and it makes for a great compact footprint or compact building within a neighborhood and this one is just across the street from, it's on, I think Garden, just across the street from the park. It fits well within a Victorian single family neighborhood. It's not that big. Comparatively, the height isn't that big. So, but a good FAR 1.0, which is still quite high. And then finally coming down to the little tiny, the smallest that can really fit anywhere in any residential neighborhood because they're so darn tiny. But this is a bungalow, which is just like the little house, like craftsman bungalows or Spanish colonial revival bungalows or Tudor revival bungalows. Bungalows just sort of means little tiny house. And in this case, they have an FAR of almost 0.5, which is still very high density. This is one more example. There's, I want to say 30 or so, 30 plus examples of little bungalow motor courts or other types. In this case, you have the drive that goes all the way through to the back, a nice little 2-story building with an arch through it. So you drive through and then you come out to the back and you have the parking in the back. And so it still allows for some parking and has all this housing. And these were done as workforce housing in 30s, 20s and 30s, but also just a great way of having a small, affordable housing. So this is kind of our range of the building types that we find historically within Santa Barbara that could be good prototypes to look at for going forward. All right, so now we're on to the AI State Street Charrette. So this was the first State Street Charrette. It was in 2018, and there was, there was I think 10 teams or so, and we all divided up and we went through. Everyone had 4 blocks of State Street, and you kind of went through and looked at trying to fit housing, specifically, but also revitalizing the downtown core as part of this as well, because this is especially when issues of vacancies and State Street and the Amazon effect and all those things were starting to become very real. And I think it was Randy Rouse came to the AI and asked them to come up with some ideas. And so this is what a number of professionals got together and did, and we sort of all studied our different groups. We got together it was the landscape architects, civil engineers, others that kind of all came together. And these were some of the quick charrettes. And a charrette is basically you come together, you do some exercises and drawings, and then you sort of you come together with information, you kind of figure some general ideas, conceptual ideas out at a very preliminary level, but very quickly. And that's the idea, is to come together, figure out ideas and have something to show for it. Now, in some ways, very fortuitously, the second State Street Charrette, which was last year, so it was 2 years later, was because of COVID, it dragged it out longer. It wasn't just everyone coming together in a building, there weren't a lot of people packing into one little building and working within a foot or two of each other. So in this case, this was drawn out and it was virtual, but they had time to do over a series of weeks and even months. Put a lot of time into it, and there was, I think for this one, there were 16 teams, and 4 of them actually worked on circulation and just sort of the outside spaces. So everything from circulation, plazas, promenade, and also a lot of the issues that need to be figured out that are some of them are more on the technical side, like what do you do with your stormwater, and you have to filter it and get into the ground, and how does that whole process work? And a lot of infrastructure questions of how you can solve some of these problems all in one shot. So along those lines, I've kind of pulled some of the examples from the second charrette, especially, but of dealing with some of these issues that I think are all part of the big picture. So one of them is obviously housing, and housing is both, you're sort of, it's absolutely core or fundamental to the whole, and in this way, it's sort of a holistic approach to the city. So the whole body, the whole body approach, sort of the whole wellness. Housing is critical to have that work and that work throughout. And so it's not the only issue, but it's definitely a huge major issue. And it in some ways a little sort of lifeblood, but it's that energy throughout the city that and it's important to do it well. If you do it well, then it could really help other parts of the city too, and just make for a good way of living. So why are we looking at this aerial? If you look at all the parking lots here. Parking lots aren't just like, oh, great potential for places to put things. They're actually a net negative of the pedestrian experience. And if for traditional cities, which are built on the pedestrian experience, the person walking on the street, and not for the person driving in the car experience, because usually, as LA can attest to, the relationship you have with other people in the cars next to you is really a relationship of anger and frustration because they're in your way, or they're trying to go to the same place you are, or they're cutting you off, as opposed to when you're walking on the street, usually it's a much more friendlier, more personal experience. And so the pedestrian experience is super important for just a general well-being of the city, and to have a general good feeling that this is great to live here, and it's enjoyable and it's beautiful, and you can see these nice things as you walk along. Well, I'd ask that you think about your experience of walking along these parking lots here on the back side of Lot 5, and even though you have a little planter or whatever else, the reality is there's a mode change when you walk along a parking lot, and it's actually a net negative. You just sort of have to get through to the next building, where you have something like a shop, or you have a public building, or offices, or whatever it is, but there's something there. And when you're walking along a parking lot, it's really not a relatable experience, because you're not relating to something that's there, except for a bunch of cars. So just the fact of putting buildings in at least along the pedestrian experience frontage of them would be an improvement for this block. So then obviously this becomes an easy low-hanging fruit for housing, but also for other structures, because really the reality is we really want our pedestrian experiences to be the best possible. That makes for the great experience of the city. And then because we're in Santa Barbara, well, we don't just want to take the experience of the grid on the outer edge. We want to go into the inside, and we want to actually have the Paseo experience good, and the courtyard experience good. So these are some examples from on one of the groups of this Rosinka, because the Madame Rosinka here. This is the only piece of architecture in the whole parking lot. This one little building right here. So they did Rosinka Gardens, and they did this whole, all this complex and structures and everything else that's mixed use around it, and really celebrated it and made a little plaza in the middle. And so this kind of potential is fantastic, because you have this corner is a big empty corner, except for Madame Rosinka's little arch and tower, and one little tiny room shop. So this was a good example of how this would actually greatly increase the pedestrian experience along Anacapa and along Canon Perdido, just by having. So the other issues, of course, another set of issues are environmental. So energy usage, and how much we use and how we use it. Solar, obviously, as a way of getting net zero. Potential sea level rise. Water, water usage and water, conservation. Stormwater management, this is an illustration of it in terms of infiltration, and how you actually get the dirty water off the roofs to get, sort of filtered down to the ground before going out to the ocean, not just throwing it into the gutter and letting it run off. And so this is an example of a California building requirement and state requirement. So it needs to get, if it can be built in an infrastructure way, then the building itself of all these buildings can be much more possible. So it's a practical thing and a technical thing, but it's nevertheless an important thing that keeps things from being built. Or keeps good things from happening. All right, transportation, of course, is another issue, a big picture infrastructure issue. So and obviously this is not like you can solve all the problems all at once, one big fell swoop, and and next year it's all done. It's obviously a matter of phasing and development, and where to put the energy, and how to get good architecture and good urban experience out of the process as you go along. But a key part of that is also transportation. How are people getting around? How are they using the space? that could make or break areas. And so really understanding and thinking about that as part of the solution is very important. And these were some examples, you know, of, you know, looking at having it down the center in terms of, you know, parades and everything else, but also bikes and perhaps trolley, like the old school trolley. Like I said, there's a lot of answers that are actually sitting right there for us, especially historically. And then you know, other ways of maybe jogging the pedestrian experience of State Street, or creating plazas or other things. So it really is. There's obviously a range of things that can happen, and part of but if you kill sort of multiple birds with one stone, it's good to be thinking about all these things all at once. And then you can have, you know, the dining, outdoor dining, and everything that we're having now with the temporarily on State Street and other streets, but temporarily with the parklets, how that might be incorporated in some areas as a more permanent thing. All right, so, and this is just a quick little dig. So we can do better, as we saw in the previous slide. So that's what we're going for, is better, or not just better, but great. So on to another sort of a series of parts of ideas that I really can and should be incorporated into all this holistic thinking. So equity in the public realm, and economic viability and vitality. And I've kind of lumped these together because there's an interesting mix between them. So what do we mean by equity in public realm? Well, it could mean a lot of different things, but I think the series I referenced at the beginning of this talk, the one from the Plaza de la Guerra Reconsidered, actually does a really good job of delving into what is the city, what actually is its purpose as a city, and who is it for, and what are some of the different components that play into it, and what are their roles, and what should be the most important, and what should be the most beautiful, and what should be secondarily so. And so this one's from Carol William Westphal, one of my professors. He did this before I took his classes, but he said those who built it in Santa Barbara, he's saying, made certain the public benefit from their, sorry, I just got to move this, from their private acts. They knew the difference between the lifeblood of commerce and the civic heart and soul. They designed their individual projects as part of a larger whole, and they recognized that a city is different from and better than a shopping center and a suburb. We could do no better than model our actions on theirs. And I thought that was a really good summary, because commerce is super important, and it is the lifeblood of the city in terms of just being able to survive and have amenities that we have, and have all these nice things that are taken care of for the city, and that we have public benefits of. And that's really great and important, important in how we construct things so that works, and it works well. But that's not the civic heart and soul. And so the civic heart and soul, and I thought that this great rendering from the second, they had a lot more time to do their watercolors. The second AIA charrette really summarized that. You see both the commerce of State Street, but you also see a massive civic gestures and very much places of art and places of culture and expression and a celebration. And so you have these both. You can make them complementary, or you can make them competing. And in this case, I think that you can really make them complementary. And the commerce can help provide some of that, and also be a great part of that. All right. I think I actually had a slightly old slide here. I said too big for Santa Barbara. It shouldn't be too big for Santa Barbara, but it should be what's the most important issue for Santa Barbara to address. So this is our next poll. We are on to
Anthony. I actually added a couple options here just to make it more
nice.
holistic.
I like it.
So we're going to launch this poll. Good. This is the last poll, and then we're going to get into the panel, right? So let's do this last question for the audience.
Okay. All right. So your options: housing, environmental issues, concerns, equity in civic and public spaces, economics, aesthetics, how it looks. It's a tie between two or three of these, or all of the above, or none of the above. All right, tell me when you think we're good, Kevin.
Just one more sec here. We're at 71 of
Okay.
90 people.
Okay. And I know I
Almost there.
can't vote now, but I tried to vote last time.
All right, those are our results.
All right, so our results. Okay, so all the above was 47%. It's a tie between 2 or 3 of these, 25%. Housing is 15%. And the next one's up, equity and civic places, 5%. Aesthetics, how it looks, 4%. 3% none of the above, and 1% environmental issues and concerns, and economics got 0. Woo, I wasn't expecting that. Okay, well, the correct answer, of course, is aesthetics, as the HLC will tell you. Just kidding, just kidding. All right, so I think that's really the idea was to really set the stage for this discussion, and I think that's really sort of where all these issues are, and get people thinking about it, and to also see examples. And then this last slide here is really just about this is the 3D scan by OGO, the 3D scan, but this is you're seeing the whole thing now. This is State Street. There's the Arlington Theater. You start to see some spaces, some parking lots, what the city is filled with and what is not. So you really start to understand it in 3 dimensions. It's also sort of a good symbol for, I think, where this next Santa Barbara, envisioning and moving towards can start to tie into, because it's also about technology. It's about understanding things in 3 dimensions and using the tools that we have now to help us continue this sort of quest for a more beautiful Santa Barbara. So with that, I'll wrap up this and turn to this panel.
Yeah, you just stop sharing your screen and we'll get the panel up on the screen.
Okay, gotcha.
There you go. Awesome.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Anthony. We're now joined by Nicole Hernandez and Nina Johnson. So I'm going to introduce our panelists here. Nicole Hernandez has a Master's of Fine Arts in Historic Preservation, and she's the City of Santa Barbara's architectural historian. She worked as architectural historian for 5 years at Historic Denver and for 4 years at the City of New Orleans before coming to join the City of Santa Barbara in 2012. And Nina Johnson is the Senior Assistant to the City Administrator for the City of Santa Barbara. She has over 20 years of experience in directing strategic initiatives and leading cross-functional teams to advance organizational goals and community vision. Nina is a creative problem solver who turns ideas into action and serves as a lead designer and implementer of marketing campaigns, high-profile projects, and public engagement strategies for the City of Santa Barbara. And I've had the pleasure of working with both Nina and Nicole, and we're really grateful that you're here. So we have a few questions that we wanted to ask the panel, and I see that several of you have added questions to the Q&A. Please continue to do that. Hopefully we'll have time for a few of those. If not, I want to let you know that we are going to collect all the questions in the Q&A because these issues will be threaded throughout our series. And so we will come back to all of these points, and I want to make sure that you all know that your questions will be addressed, if not tonight, at some point in the series. So our first question for the panel, and I'd like to have Nicole take this one on first, and others can jump in, is that we know there is a lot of community interest in converting commercial structures, especially on State Street, to housing. Can you talk to us about what's involved in that process and what are the opportunities and challenges for doing that?
Yes, thank you. Well, one of the exciting opportunities is that last summer the zoning downtown was changed. So it does allow residential use in our downtown core, which will facilitate housing, and it's actually 63 units per acre with no parking requirements. So that's kind of flipped our zoning on its head, where before it would have had to be commercial with parking, which kind of gave us the many vacant parking lots that we have now. The challenges in rehabbing these great old buildings for commercial, a lot of them will need extra windows. A lot of them aren't supplied with the adequate plumbing to make many housing units, and they need fire rated walls in between the units. So it tends to be very difficult for a developer to pay the cost to change the commercial use into a housing use.
Great, thank you. Would anyone else like to jump in on that question?
Yeah, I'll jump in. That I think along those lines, I think just looking at some of the costs to develop a housing project, I think it's really important for everyone to now look at everything from the perspective of the property owner. And that's not a perspective that we take very often as we look at all of the different needs downtown. But there are a lot of costs involved in developing a project, and how do we get some predictability in the costs and lower the risk. So that's really important if we want to see projects take off and get off the ground. Some of those costs are not under our control, so we can't control, the cost of building materials and labor, but we can, look at our own cost for approval and the design process. The design process is so important, and all of that feedback really shapes the community that we have. And we have high standards that we need to maintain. It's really finding that balance so that we can keep costs reasonable and predictable. I think that predictability is really important, because more property owners feel a sense of predictability, then they know, the risk, we're taking the risk out of the equation, or more of it. So that's really important if we want to see more housing in some of the vacant buildings that we have. And I will also mention that many of you know we have a lot of vacant retail spaces, but we're also looking at the possibility of more large office spaces. And you have companies that have large office spaces, you have more employees who have learned how to work remotely. So we're looking at that real estate trend as well. So we really need to be creative in how we repurpose a lot of those buildings. And I look to a lot of the ideas that are probably for this panel, how many ideas we have to make it easier to adapt some of our current buildings, the older buildings that we have. What are our options? How can we do that?
Great, thank you, Nicole. Your comments remind us that the situation is changing quickly, and it's evolving under our feet. And Nina, I think you give us a good reminder about all the important stakeholders and that it takes to come together and find that balance so that we can get the housing that we need. Let's move on to our next question, which is, how can we balance this need for additional housing with the protection and appreciation of our historic resources? And I'd like Nicole to start with that one as well.
Oh, thanks. So I really think that preservation of historic resources and new housing goes hand in hand. We have a lot of space for new housing. We have a lot of empty parking lots, as Anthony demonstrated in his presentation. And for them to infill that negative space and highlight our historic resources with compatible architecture will only make our historic resources shine better and make people want to come see them more, because we won't have these negative pedestrian experiences. And so I really think it's a win-win for both. They don't go one without the other.
I think in the design charrette that Anthony showed a lot of images, that was one of the lessons and takeaways, that how so you can design in housing units really into the fabric and protect a lot of our historic buildings, and how they really can merge into the downtown. And there are many examples of building some housing on underutilized parking lots and spaces that I think they showed very seamlessly how we could see new additional units and complementing the historic character that we have.
Great, thank you. And this last question is for all of you. So we'd like to hear from all of you. And Nina, if you would take this on to start. When you think about downtown 10 years from now, what kind of qualities or values are most important when we imagine what we want that downtown to be like?
In the future, we want a welcoming place for our whole community. And that comes through a strong sense of pride and involvement in shaping those public spaces, getting people involved in all that we're doing downtown and all of the public areas. In the next chapter, it would be great for us to see more public art and more decoration in all of our designs, the decorative details and craftsmanship, more outdoor performance spaces. I think now that we have been shifting more of our activity outdoors, and it's time for us to move the performing arts and music into the natural setting. That would be a great transition for us. Anthony showed so many great photos of paseos and courtyards, and to see more of those and better use of the ones we already have, more splashes of color to add to our palette, more lush greenery, all of those things, really creating a living environment, not just a shopping destination. So transitioning to the living village where everyone can go out and interact.
Great, thank you for painting that picture for us. And Nicole, what would your future downtown look like?
I really agree, and I'd love to see it built out. So we sort of have these outdoor rooms framing all our spaces, and it feels really vibrant, just full of people in and out, like going out to dinner in the restaurant just 2 blocks from their house, you know, because they all live and we're all doing so much down here, and it's got this real sense of vitality.
Excellent. And Anthony, what would you add?
I would say, and actually I'm cheating and seeing some of the questions flying about too, but that actually ties this a bit. There's 2 things, and I think one thing that wasn't mentioned, but I think would be part of this answer is the historic resources. And I you know, as the chair of the Historic Management Commission, this is the Hanover Trust for Historic Preservation. In some ways, I kind of take that as a given, but both the celebration of our historic resources that we have, identification and celebration of them, and which can often happen where developments go next to them by actually turning that into the plaza or the little mini courtyard or the paseo or whatever. And so all of a sudden, the historic resource also gets sort of celebrated and accentuated in a way that gets a little sort of pride of place of that building because it's special and it's a part of the community. So I would say that in going forward, I would say that that's the moving in that direction where buildings are infilling, but at the same time also respecting the historic resource and kind of using them as a great driver for the beauty of the city. Because historic resources, you can't remake one. It's not easy to make an instant historic resource. So it's also a great economic driver. It's also a great cultural driver for the city to really use and celebrate those. So I would see that sort of some of that, the low-hanging fruit being the parking lots and other areas. And then I don't know if we're going to get into a question on parking, but I think that there were some maybe people thought that some of the presentation was also so anti-car that I just hate the car. But maybe we'll want to kind of open that up for group discussion a little more in terms of the car and what we think about it. So.
All right. Well,
so I answered it with a question.
Thank you for those answers. And I'm amazed at how much of a shared vision you have about what a thriving and vibrant downtown would look like. And there's a lot of conformity there, which is great. It's a city that I would want to live in. And Anthony, I was going to pull out that question about historic preservation. So I'm glad that you found that first and addressed it, because that's an important question from Mary Louise Days in our audience. We have a few other great questions. I think I'm going to ask Kevin to pull up one about parking. I know that's showed up a few times. We had a particular question I thought was interesting about the wedding cake style, and that this maybe has been something that has been encouraged on some of our design review boards, and yet you make a convincing argument against it in your talk. And is there a disconnect there?
That's a good question. It's totally fair. And so when I analyze things, and this actually ties to the car parking question too. So for part of my grad studies, I was in Rome for a semester with no car and a family of 4 little kids. We got around Rome just great, bussed and walked everywhere, and we're in great shape. And it was a fantastic experience. Now it's because it's Rome. It's built in that way, and it works really well. So a big picture of the parking, even though I'm slamming parking, we do need the car. We do, at least for now, very much so. And so it does need to be part of projects, and the lift stackers and things like that are condensing it, and at least getting more, condensing the parking into a smaller capacity, which is great. So I think there's strategies like that. And over time, however, I would hope that an infrastructure of transportation could take place, so you can at least get a lot of the cars off the road and a lot of the cars out of the block. But that's a slow thing. That's a longer picture plan, and it takes having great infrastructure in place to actually do it. And that includes biking and busing and everything else. Sorry, I went down the wrong path and I got distracted. I forgot what to get at.
It was the wedding cake style.
The wedding cake,
something
yeah.
that.
So in Paris, when we went to Paris on a trip, it's interesting. There's a 5 and 6 story, well, 5 stories straight up and a mansard roof that has a 6 story. And that's what the Paris Boulevard is. It's this big solid wall. And the reality from a traditional urban point of view is that you actually want to have an outdoor room, to have it feel like a room. You actually need your walls tall enough and close enough together to start to feel like a real space. And then it starts to feel like a place. As soon as you start stretching out wider and wider and you turn to these super wide boulevards with little tiny houses on either side, all of a sudden you're in no man's land, and it's not a place anymore. And so one of the things that's important about making an outdoor space and place is actually the walls. If they're shorter, they need to be closer together for sure to actually feel like a contained space. If they're taller, they can be farther apart and feel like a contained space. So I lean much more than most of the other review board members towards a more traditional urbanism that just says, pick where you're making your room to, go up. And the reality is when you're close to that building, it doesn't matter if it's 1 story or 5 stories. Like when you walk by the Balboa building as the example, right on Paseo Nuevo, no one looks up, no one realizes it. You see trees and that's it. You never see really anything beyond that, or you never look up to that. And so I don't see it as a looming thing if done well. And so, my answer to that is I know I'm in a bit of a disagreement with the ways that, well, at least with ways things have been done. I think the more 3-dimensional we get with our modeling, I think that's part of the benefit of the computer, to be able to see a computer model. You start to understand that your experience from the street with anything more than a 2-story building is almost all the same on most of our streets, because the walls are close enough together that you see building no matter what. So, and then you need to have the cross streets for your vistas to the mountains. So anyways, sorry.
Thank you. So we've got 2 live issues here on Nicole or Nina. Would you like to jump in on the wedding caking question, or the question from the audience member about whether we are unfairly undervaluing parking in our downtown as we think ahead?
I can jump in. I really think you can build parking to be part of the walls that make the room. You can have the ground floor as retail and go up and make the buildings decorative. They've done it in cities all over the world. It doesn't have to be a surface level parking. There's so many more creative solutions. And I even saw one of the questions was, what about even using like the top floors of a parking garage as housing and having the parking in between? And there's some amazing examples, and even like beautiful plants coming out of the openings, since you have to leave the openings coming. So surface level parking, just because we don't have that doesn't mean there won't be parking. There's so many other solutions. And I am also sort of a Paris and Rome lover, and every time I go, I count how many floors up, and usually they're 5 or 6 floors up, straight up, and it feels like a great space to be. And I think that's why I also love the Julia Morgan building, because I think it also feels like a great place to be under. So I do kind of prefer the straight up and let the building express itself and not hide itself.
Thank you. And we'll take one final question. I'm intrigued by a question about equity, and that was a great point that Anthony mentioned in his list of future concerns. And the audience member asks, are there studies showing that creating equity in, I guess, in your downtowns can actually support and enhance commerce in downtowns and city centers?
I'll let someone who knows the answer that. I don't know. I'm sure that's a great question. I think that was worth looking into for sure. Yeah, I think in my mind, aside from that question, I think that would be great to answer. And I think that probably the answer is yes, because usually good, strong cities that have good urban cores of amenities that aren't just for the very, very particular either class or just particular user. And have very good sort of general spaces for all people to gather and tend to have the vibrancy because they draw people to have also support the economics. So as a general thing, I would say that's probably true. It's a great thing to look into, because if you also can show how much it is or what the types are, that's also very helpful from that side of things. So.
Great. Nina, I'd love to give you the last word tonight,
Okay.
and if you want to chime in on that question.
Yeah, I think we need to get our whole community involved in reviewing the designs of public spaces and make sure all of our voices are heard, because the more people feel part of the design of downtown, I think that it's a place that they want to be part of, and they're going to be connected to history and what's happening in their communities. So I think that's really important. And building spaces that are really serving the needs of all of our residents, our youth, just making sure all of our groups, there's something to appeal to everyone. I think that's really important. And we need to do that by listening to them. During this pandemic, it's our time to innovate right now and pivot and make use of the vacant buildings and really be creative. So this is our time to shine, as Nicole was saying, and be flexible with our design solutions.
Thank you. And just as we're on our way out here, I just want to give a shout out to you, Nina, for the underpass project, that experimental weekend that we did a couple of years ago before the pandemic, because I think that was a great example of sort of equity and access to a really broad, diverse range of our community members who all streamed down there, including me and my family, to enjoy that experience. And we also had dinner at a local restaurant. And so the commerce surrounding that project really benefited from having this free, very interactive, experiential evening. So thank you for that. And thank you, Nicole, for all of your good work, my partner in preservation. And thank you, Anthony, my board president, for that amazing presentation. Just a reminder that these will all be recorded, and so you'll be able to review them later and share them with your colleagues. You can check on our website, and we'll have the recording up in a couple of days. So thank you again to our panelists, and have a good evening, everyone.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.